Imagine standing inside a gas chamber where thousands of people took their final breaths. Imagine touching a piece of steel recovered from the Titanic. Imagine paying $250,000 for the chance to descend nearly 2.5 miles beneath the Atlantic Ocean to stare at a shipwreck that claimed more than 1,500 lives. Now ask yourself a simple question. Why? Why are we drawn to places where people suffered? Why do we travel across the world to stand where atrocities occurred? Why do museums charge admission to view the artifacts of tragedy? And why, when we pass an accident on the highway, do so many of us instinctively slow down to look? Today we're exploring a phenomenon known as disaster tourism. Some call it education, some call it remembrance, others call it exploitation. And by the end of this video, you may find yourself questioning where the line between those things really exists. Disaster tourism is exactly what it sounds like. It involves traveling to locations associated with death, tragedy, suffering, catastrophe, or historical horrors. Sometimes these locations are centuries old. Sometimes they're only months removed from disaster. The destinations vary dramatically: battlefields, concentration camps, sites of terrorist attacks, nuclear disasters, shipwrecks, mass graves, even active disaster zones. The motivations of visitors are equally diverse. Some come to learn, some come to mourn, some come to honor victims, and some simply come because they're fascinated by tragedy. The uncomfortable truth is that these motivations often overlap. Education, curiosity, empathy, fascination, and voyeurism can all exist within the same visitor, and that's where the moral questions begin. Let's begin with perhaps the most powerful example, the Holocaust. Every year, millions of people visit sites connected to Nazi Germany's systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. Places like Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dachau, and Treblinka have become destinations for visitors from around the world. At first glance, these visits seem unquestionably justified. These sites preserve evidence of one of humanity's darkest chapters. Without them, future generations might forget, or worse, deny what happened. Many survivors spent decades advocating for these locations to be preserved precisely because memory matters. But even here, ethical complications emerge. In recent years, memorial organizations have repeatedly criticized tourists for taking smiling selfies, filming social media content, and treating concentration camps as backdrops for personal branding. The criticism isn't about visitation itself, it's about intent. There's a profound difference between standing in a gas chamber to understand history and standing there because it makes for an interesting Instagram post. The location hasn't changed, the behavior has. And that distinction matters, because one seeks remembrance, the other seeks consumption. Now consider the Titanic. When the ship sank in April 1912, more than 1,500 people died in freezing Atlantic waters. For families of the victims, it was a nightmare. For the world, it became a symbol. More than a century later, Titanic has evolved into something much larger than a historical event. It has become an industry. Museums, traveling exhibitions, books, documentaries, souvenirs, movies, virtual reality experiences. Entire businesses now exist because of a tragedy that killed over 1,000 people. Many visitors genuinely seek historical understanding. The Titanic represented technological ambition, class divisions, and human vulnerability. Its story remains compelling. Yet the questions remain, would these exhibitions exist if the disaster hadn't occurred? Of course not. Their existence depends entirely upon human suffering. That doesn't automatically make them wrong, but it does force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. A great deal of money is being made from a catastrophe. For some people, observing tragedy from a distance isn't enough. They want immersion. They want proximity. They want experience. The desire reached its most dramatic expression in 2023. 5 passengers boarded the Titan submersible to descend nearly 13,000 feet to view the Titanic wreck. The trip cost approximately $250,000 per seat. The vessel never returned. The submersible suffered a catastrophic implosion, instantly killing everyone on board. The irony was impossible to ignore, and in truth, many of us struggle to empathize with those on the submersible that died. A journey intended to witness one famous maritime disaster became another. But beyond the tragedy itself lies a deeper question. Why were people willing to risk their lives and spend enormous sums of money simply to see a shipwreck? The answer lies somewhere between adventure, curiosity, prestige, and fascination with death itself. The Titanic isn't merely a wreck. It's a gravesite. More than 1,500 people died there. Yet people continue to seek ever closer encounters with it. At what point does remembrance become intrusion? To understand disaster tourism, we first have to understand ourselves. Human beings possess an uncomfortable trait. We are fascinated by catastrophe. Psychologists call this morbid curiosity. It's the reason true crime is popular. It's the reason disaster documentaries attract millions of viewers. It's the reason headlines about tragedy often outperform positive news. And it's the reason people slow down when passing a car accident. The phenomenon is so common that it has its own name, rubbernecking. Drivers know they should keep moving. They know steering creates traffic. They know it may even cause additional accidents, yet they look anyway. Why? Because the human brain is naturally drawn towards unusual, dangerous, and emotionally intense situations. Disaster tourism may simply be rubbernecking on a global scale. The same impulse, the same curiosity, just expressed through travel. Then there's the issue of money. Someone profits from disaster tourism. Hotels, tour operators, museums, guides, transportation companies, local governments. Sometimes the revenue helps preserve important historical sites. Sometimes it supports local communities. Those are legitimate benefits, but financial incentives can also create troubling outcomes. When suffering becomes a product, there is pressure to market it, to package it, to make it more appealing, to increase visitor numbers, and that's where ethical boundaries begin to blur. A memorial seeks remembrance, an attraction seeks customers. The two can coexist, but they're not the same thing. The more commercialized a tragedy becomes, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish education from entertainment. Perhaps the most important realization is that disaster tourism isn't entirely good or entirely bad. Without visitors, many historical sites would disappear. Without museums, memories fade. Without preservation, future generations lose the ability to learn from past mistakes. But there is another truth. Many people are drawn to these places for reasons they may not fully understand themselves. Curiosity, thrill, fascination, a desire to get close to something terrible. The same instinct that makes drivers slow down at accident sites. The same instinct that causes crowds to gather when disaster strikes. The line between remembrance and voyeurism is often thinner than we'd like to admit. So the next time you visit a disaster site, a memorial, a shipwreck exhibit, or a place where unimaginable suffering occurred, ask yourself one simple question. Am I here to remember, or am I here to look? Because the answer to that question may determine whether disaster tourism is an act of education or simply a more sophisticated form of rubbernecking. If you liked this video, please hit subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.